The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Whitmore mansion as Charlotte pressed her face against the cold window glass. Beyond the manicured gardens, New York City sprawled endlessly, its lights twinkling like distant stars she could never reach. At 25, she possessed everything money could buy. Designer gowns that cost more than most people's yearly salaries, jewelry that adorned European royalty, and a trust fund that could finance small countries. Yet she felt like a prisoner in her own gilded world. "Charlotte, darling, you simply must try on the Valentino for tonight's charity gala." Her mother, Eleanor Whitmore, glided into the room with the grace of someone born into old money. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair never moved, even when she shook her head in disapproval. "The Ashfords will be there, and their son James has been asking about you constantly." Charlotte turned from the window, her emerald eyes reflecting a weariness that seemed far too old for her years. "Mother, I've told you 100 times. I'm not interested in James Ashford or his family's railroad fortune. I don't want to be married off like some business merger." Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin line, the same expression she wore when discussing unpleasant matters like staff raises or charity obligations. "Don't be ridiculous, Charlotte. Love is a luxury we cannot afford. The Whitmore name carries responsibilities, and you have a duty to maintain our family's position in society." The word duty fell between them like a wall of ice. Charlotte had heard it her entire life, whispered in boardrooms and shouted during family arguments. Duty to marry well, duty to produce heirs, duty to smile and wave at society functions, while slowly dying inside. She watched her mother arrange flowers with mechanical precision, each stem placed exactly where tradition demanded. "The Valentino dress arrived this morning," Eleanor continued, not noticing her daughter's silence. "Maria has already pressed it and hung it in your closet. I specifically requested she handle it personally. That girl has such gentle hands, for someone from her background." Charlotte's attention snapped back to the conversation. "Maria?" "The new seamstress, dear. She's been working on your wardrobe adjustments for the past month. Quite talented, actually, though I do worry about her influence on the other staff. She has these ideas about workers' rights that are frankly inappropriate for someone in her position." Something stirred in Charlotte's chest, a curiosity she hadn't felt in years. In her world, the help remained invisible, nameless faces who ensured her life ran smoothly. But there was something about the way her mother mentioned this Maria, a hint of reluctant respect mixed with disapproval, that intrigued her. Later that afternoon, Charlotte found herself walking down the servants' staircase for the first time in her adult life. The narrow corridors smelled of lavender soap and fresh linen, so different from the heavy perfume and cigar smoke that permeated the main floors. She could hear humming coming from the sewing room, a melody that seemed to dance through the air with genuine joy. She paused at the doorway and watched as Maria worked at an antique Singer sewing machine. The young woman couldn't have been much older than Charlotte herself, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and fingers that moved across fabric with the confidence of an artist. She wore a simple blue dress that had been mended several times, but she carried herself with a dignity that made expensive clothes seem unnecessary. "The hem on the Valentino is perfect," Charlotte said softly, stepping into the room. Maria looked up, startled, and immediately began to rise. "Miss Whitmore, I'm so sorry I didn't hear you come down. Please let me—" "No, please don't get up." Charlotte moved closer to examine the intricate beadwork Maria was adding to an evening gown. "This is beautiful. Did you design this pattern yourself?" Maria's cheeks flushed with pride. "Yes, miss. I studied fashion design before I came to work here. I hope you don't mind that I took some liberties with the original design. I thought it might complement your skin tone better." Charlotte stared at the delicate embroidery, each stitch telling a story of patience and skill. In her world, everything was bought, traded, or inherited. She had never met someone who created beauty with their own hands. "It's extraordinary. You have real talent." "Thank you, miss. That means more than you know." Their eyes met for a moment, and Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth she had never experienced before. Maria's smile was genuine, unguarded, so different from the calculated expression she encountered at society parties. There was kindness in those dark eyes, and intelligence, and something else that made Charlotte's heart race unexpectedly. "I should let you return to your work," Charlotte said reluctantly. As she turned to leave, Maria's voice stopped her. "Miss Whitmore? If you don't mind me saying, the yellow roses in the main hall would look beautiful with baby's breath. I noticed them this morning and I thought, well, I have some experience with flower arrangements too." Charlotte smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time in months. "I'll mention it to the groundskeeper. Thank you, Maria." As she climbed the stairs back to her world of marble and gold, Charlotte's mind raced. Something had awakened in her during that brief encounter, something dangerous and wonderful and completely forbidden. She thought about Maria's hands creating beauty from nothing, about her gentle voice, and the way she had looked directly into Charlotte's eyes without fear or calculation. That night, as she stood in her closet surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of designer clothing, Charlotte found herself touching the hem of the Valentino dress. Each stitch represented hours of careful work by someone who cared about perfection, not for money or recognition, but simply because it mattered to her. For the first time in her life, Charlotte Whitmore was falling in love, and it terrified her more than anything she had ever faced. 3 weeks had passed since Charlotte's first encounter with Maria, and she found herself creating excuses to visit the sewing room. Each conversation revealed new layers to the seamstress: her dreams of opening her own boutique, her evening classes in business management, her quiet determination to rise above her circumstances through hard work rather than luck or inheritance. "You worksimp don't have to keep coming down here, Miss Whitmore," Maria said one afternoon, as Charlotte sat in a corner chair, watching her work on a particularly challenging evening gown. "I'm sure you have more important things to do." Charlotte looked up from the fashion sketches she had been admiring. "More important than this? Maria, these designs are incredible. You could show them to any fashion house in Paris and they'd hire you immediately." Maria's hand stilled on the fabric. "That's very kind. But people like me don't get opportunities like that. We work with what we have and make the best of it. But why? Why should your talent be limited by circumstances you didn't choose?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that went far beyond fashion and career aspirations. Maria set down her needle and looked directly at Charlotte, her expression serious. "Because that's how the world works, Miss Whitmore. Some people are born to wear the dresses and others are born to make them. Crossing those lines, it doesn't end well for people like me." Charlotte stood and moved closer, her heart pounding. "What if I don't believe in those lines? What if I think they're arbitrary and cruel and designed to keep people apart who might otherwise—" She stopped herself before completing the thought, but Maria's eyes widened with understanding. They stared at each other in silence, both recognizing the dangerous territory they were approaching. "Charlotte," Maria whispered, using her first name for the first time. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." Charlotte's voice was barely audible. "I understand that. I've spent my entire life in a cage made of expectations and traditions that mean nothing to me. I understand that I've never felt truly alive until I started coming down here to talk with you." Maria stood slowly, her hand reaching out as if to touch Charlotte's face, then stopping midair. "This is impossible. Your family, my job, the whole world would be against us." "Then maybe the whole world is wrong." The words escaped Charlotte's lips before she could stop them, and she saw their impact in Maria's expression. Surprise, hope, fear, and something else that made Charlotte's breath catch in her throat. Maria, The sewing room door burst open, and Eleanor Whitmore stood in the doorway, her face a mask of controlled fury. Charlotte Elizabeth Whitmore, what in God's name are you doing down here? Both women stepped apart quickly, but not quickly enough to escape Eleanor's sharp eyes. Charlotte watched her mother's gaze move between them, taking in their proximity, their flushed faces, the intimate atmosphere of the small room. "I was just checking on my dress for the Morrison wedding," Charlotte said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "In the servants' quarters? When you have a perfectly good intercom system in your room?" Eleanor's voice could have frozen champagne. "Maria, please excuse us. Charlotte, you will come with me immediately." As they climbed the stairs, Eleanor's silence was more terrifying than any lecture. Charlotte could feel her mother's anger radiating like heat from a furnace, and she knew that whatever happened next would change everything. In the privacy of Eleanor's study, surrounded by portraits of stern-faced Whitmore ancestors, the confrontation began. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what people would say if they knew the Whitmore heiress was spending time alone with the help? Her name is Maria, Mother, and she's not the help. She's a talented, intelligent woman who deserves respect." Eleanor's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Respect? Charlotte, that girl is an employee. She's paid to sew your clothes and keep her opinions to herself. The fact that you've forgotten the natural order of things is deeply disturbing." "The natural order?" Charlotte's own anger began to rise. "You mean the order that says I have to marry someone I don't love to preserve a fortune I never asked for?" "Yes, exactly that order. The order that built this house, that funds your lifestyle, that gives you the luxury of having romantic notions about inappropriate relationships." Charlotte stared at her mother, seeing clearly for the first time the prison that Eleanor had built around both of their lives. "What if I don't want this luxury? What if I'd rather have something real than something expensive?" "Then you're a fool." Eleanor moved to her desk and pulled out a legal document. "James Ashford has formally requested your hand in marriage. His father and I have been discussing terms for weeks. The announcement will appear in the Times next Sunday." The papers fluttered to the floor as Charlotte's hands began to shake. "You can't be serious. I won't marry him. I won't marry anyone you choose for me. You will, or you'll lose everything. The trust fund, this house, your allowance, everything. You'll discover very quickly how romantic poverty becomes when you're living it instead of admiring it from a distance." Charlotte looked at her mother's face and saw no mercy, no understanding, no love. Only the cold calculation of a woman who had sacrificed her own heart so long ago that she had forgotten it ever existed. "I need time to think. You have until Sunday to come to your senses." "And Charlotte?" Eleanor's voice followed her to the door. "You are forbidden from going to the servants' quarters again. I've already spoken to the head of staff. Any violation of this rule will result in immediate termination for certain employees." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. The threat was clear. If she continued to see Maria, her mother would destroy the seamstress's livelihood without hesitation. That night, Charlotte stood at her window again. But this time she wasn't looking at the lights of the city. She was looking down at the small window of the servants' quarters where Maria lived, wondering if the woman who had awakened her heart was thinking about her too. The golden cage had never felt smaller, and for the first time in her life, Charlotte Whitmore was planning her escape. Charlotte barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Maria's face. The hope that had flickered there when Charlotte spoke of defying the world, followed by the fear when Eleanor discovered them. By dawn, she had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. She waited until the household was busy with morning routines before slipping down to the servants' quarters one final time. She had to warn Maria about her mother's threats, had to explain why she couldn't visit anymore, had to find some way to protect the woman she was falling in love with. The sewing room was empty, but Charlotte could hear voices from the adjacent storage area. She moved closer and froze when she recognized her mother's voice, cold and sharp as winter steel. "Understand me perfectly, Miss Rodriguez. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately." "But Mrs. Whitmore, I haven't done anything wrong. My work has been exemplary." "Your work is not in question. Your inappropriate influence on my daughter, however, is intolerable. You will pack your belongings and be off the premises within the hour?" Charlotte pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. She had to do something, had to stop this injustice. But before she could move, Maria's voice stopped her, cold. "You can't fire me for this. I can fire you for any reason I choose, Miss Rodriguez. You are an at-will employee with no contract and no protections. Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, I think you'll find that's not entirely accurate." The tone of Maria's voice had changed completely. Gone was the deferential servant's manner, replaced by something confident and unmistakably authoritative. Charlotte frowned, confusion mixing with her panic. "What did you say?" Eleanor's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I said you can't fire me. Not when I own 43% of Whitmore Industries." The silence that followed was so complete that Charlotte wondered if her heart had stopped beating. She pressed her ear closer to the wall, certain she had misheard. "That's impossible," Eleanor whispered. "Is it? Your late husband was very grateful for the financial backing I provided during the 2019 crisis. The stock transfers are all properly documented, Mrs. Whitmore. I have the paperwork in my room if you'd like to review it." Charlotte's mind reeled. Her father had died 3 years ago, and she remembered the company's financial difficulties that had somehow resolved themselves. But Maria was a seamstress, a poor seamstress who lived in the servants' quarters and mended clothes for a living. "Who are you?" Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "My name is Maria Elena Rodriguez Santos. I'm the sole heir to the Santos shipping fortune, and I've been quietly acquiring shares in failing American companies for the past 5 years. Whitmore Industries was, let's call it, a strategic investment." Charlotte felt the world tilt on its axis. Everything she thought she knew crumbled in an instant. The woman she had fallen in love with, the poor, hard-working seamstress, was apparently wealthier than her own family. But why? Eleanor's composure had completely shattered. Why work as a servant? Why live like this? Maria's laugh was soft, but bitter. "Because I wanted to understand the people whose companies I was buying. I wanted to see how the families, who had looked down on people like me for generations, treated their employees when they thought no one important was watching. And what did you discover?" Exactly what I expected. Cruelty disguised as tradition, exploitation called duty, and hearts that have been frozen by greed and prejudice. Charlotte heard footsteps and pressed herself deeper into the shadows as Eleanor emerged from the storage room, her face pale and her hands shaking. Maria followed, no longer the deferential seamstress, but a woman who commanded respect through her very presence. "There's more, isn't there?" Eleanor asked, her voice defeated. "Your daughter," Maria said quietly. "I never planned to fall in love with her. That wasn't part of my research." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Maria loved her. The feeling was real, even if everything else had been a lie. But you did plan everything else. The job application, the perfect recommendations, even your humble background story. Yes. I plan to document the treatment of workers in wealthy households, to gather evidence for a book I'm writing about class inequality in America. I plan to stay for 6 months, collect my data, and leave. I never planned to find someone who looked at me, really looked at me, like I was worth more than my last name or my bank account. Eleanor sank into a chair, the weight of revelation crushing her usual poise. "How much do you know about our finances?" "Everything. Your husband borrowed heavily against future earnings to maintain your lifestyle. The house is mortgaged, the art collection has been quietly sold and replaced with reproductions, and Charlotte's trust fund was used as collateral for loans that are coming due next month. James Ashford's marriage proposal, is your last hope of avoiding bankruptcy. Yes, I know. Maria's voice softened slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't come here to destroy your family. I came here to understand it. And what I've learned is that your daughter is the only person in this house who sees people as human beings rather than assets or obstacles. Charlotte couldn't listen anymore. She stumbled away from the wall, her mind spinning with betrayal and confusion, and a love that suddenly felt like quicksand beneath her feet. Everything was a lie. Her family's wealth, Maria's poverty, the future she had been planning to sacrifice for love. All of it built on deception. She ran through the house, past startled servants, up marble staircases that no longer seemed solid, into her room where she locked the door and tried to make sense of a world that had turned completely upside down. The woman she loved was rich. Her family was poor. The marriage her mother was forcing on her was the only thing standing between them and financial ruin. And the person who held their fate in her hands was the same person who had broken Charlotte's heart by making her fall in love with someone who didn't really exist. Outside her door, she could hear hurried footsteps and urgent whispers. The secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. But as she pressed her face against the window glass, looking out at a world that suddenly seemed foreign and hostile, Charlotte realized that the most devastating truth of all was this: despite everything, despite the lies and the deception and the manipulation, she was still desperately in love with Maria Rodriguez Santos, and that love was about to cost her everything she had ever known. The Whitmore mansion felt like a tomb in the hours following Maria's revelation. Charlotte remained locked in her room, refusing meals and visitors, while below, the staff whispered in urgent clusters about the scandal that was unfolding in their carefully ordered world. Eleanor paced the library like a caged animal, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled hysteria. She had spent the morning on the phone with lawyers, accountants, and James Ashford's family, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of her carefully constructed lies. The marriage contract must be signed immediately, she said to Charlotte, through the locked door. James is willing to accelerate the timeline given our circumstances. I won't do it, Charlotte called back, her voice hoarse from crying. I won't marry him to save a fortune built on borrowed money and false pretenses. Then you'll watch your family name become synonymous with bankruptcy and scandal. Is that what you want? To see everything your father worked for destroyed? Charlotte pressed her back against the door, thinking of the man who had raised her with stories of Whitmore honor and legacy. She had discovered that morning, through overheard phone conversations, that her father's successful business dealings had been little more than elaborate schemes to maintain appearances. The revelation felt like losing him all over again. Soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Charlotte, Maria's voice was barely audible through the heavy wood. May I please speak with you? Go away. The words came out broken, filled with a pain that surprised Charlotte with its intensity. I know you must hate me. I know this seems impossible to understand. But please, let me explain. Explain what? How you manipulated my family? How you made me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist? How you watched me pour my heart out about wanting something real while you were lying about everything? The silence stretched so long that Charlotte thought Maria had left. Then, quietly, I never lied about loving you. Charlotte's resolve cracked slightly, but she forced herself to remain strong. How can I believe anything you say? Because I'm giving up everything to prove it. Before Charlotte could ask what that meant, she heard Eleanor's sharp voice in the hallway. What are you doing here? I thought I made myself clear. You did, and I've made myself clear as well. I'm transferring my shares in Whitmore Industries to Charlotte, with no strings attached. She'll own 43% of the company outright. Charlotte threw open her door to find Maria standing in the hallway, holding a thick legal document. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, still wearing the simple blue dress that had once seemed like poverty. but now seemed like the most elaborate costume Charlotte had ever seen. "I don't understand," Eleanor said, snatching the papers to examine them. "It's quite simple. Charlotte will control the company's future. She can choose to marry James Ashford and merge the assets, or she can choose to run the business herself, or she can choose to sell everything and start over. The choice is entirely hers." Charlotte stared at Maria, searching her face for some hint of manipulation or hidden agenda. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you. And because love without choice isn't love at all. It's just another kind of prison." Eleanor looked up from the papers, her face pale. "These documents are legitimate. But why? Why would you give up such valuable assets?" Maria turned to look at Charlotte, and in her eyes was a vulnerability that stripped away every pretense. "Because the only thing in this house worth having is something that can't be bought or sold or inherited. And I've already lost it through my own stupidity." "You haven't lost it," Charlotte whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Hope flickered across Maria's features. "Charlotte, I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I know that everything I did was wrong, no matter what my intentions were. But the woman who fell in love with you, that part was real. That part was the most real thing I've ever experienced." Eleanor watched the exchange with growing alarm. "Charlotte, think about what you're saying. This woman deceived us all. She infiltrated our home under false pretenses to document how we treat people we consider beneath us," Charlotte said, her voice gaining strength. "And what did she find, Mother? What did her research reveal about the Whitmore family values?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed wordlessly as she confronted the truth of their behavior. The casual cruelty, the dismissive attitudes, the treatment of human beings as expendable resources. Maria stepped closer to Charlotte, her voice urgent. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for another chance. I'm asking you to be free. Take the company shares. Make your own decisions. Live the life you choose instead of the life you inherited." "And what about you?" Charlotte asked. "What happens to you in this grand gesture?" "I go back to my real life. I write my book about class and privilege in America, and I try to do some good with the resources I have. And I live with the knowledge that I met someone extraordinary and lost her through my own cowardice." Charlotte looked at the legal documents, at her mother's stricken face, at Maria's resigned expression. Everything she had believed about her world had crumbled in the span of a single morning, but from the wreckage she could see something new emerging. Possibility. "Mother, call James Ashford and tell him the engagement is off." "Charlotte, no. You can't possibly. I can and I am. I'm taking control of my own life starting now." She turned to Maria, her heart pounding with fear and hope in equal measure. "And you're not going anywhere." Maria's eyes widened. "Charlotte, you can't trust me after what I've done." "No, I can't. Not yet. But I can choose to try, if you're willing to earn that trust back honestly this time." Eleanor sank into a chair, defeated. "This is madness. Absolute madness." Charlotte looked at her mother with a mixture of love and pity. "No, Mother. This is freedom. For the first time in my life, I'm free to make my own choices and my own mistakes." She took the legal documents from Eleanor's trembling hands and met Maria's gaze. "We're going to start over. No lies, no pretenses, no secrets. Just two people who have to figure out if what they felt was real enough to survive the truth." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'd like that very much." As Charlotte held the papers that represented her liberation, she realized that she was no longer the same person who had pressed her face against the window, dreaming of escape. She had broken free of her golden cage, and whatever came next would be entirely her own choice. The price of truth had been everything she thought she knew about her world. But perhaps, she thought, as she looked at Maria's hopeful face. It was a price worth paying. 6 months later, Charlotte stood in the boardroom of Whitmore Industries, addressing a table full of investors and board members who had once dismissed her as nothing more than a decorative heiress. The company had been restructured, the debts settled through strategic partnerships rather than desperate marriages, and the quarterly reports showed the first profitable period in 3 years. The employee profit-sharing program has increased productivity by 30%, Charlotte said, pointing to the charts displayed on the wall screen. When people feel valued and fairly compensated, they invest themselves in the company's success. James Ashford, who had taken the broken engagement, with surprising grace, leaned forward from his seat at the table. And the worker advocacy program? Fully implemented across all our subsidiaries. We've eliminated the 2-tier system that treated administrative and manual laborers differently. Everyone receives the same healthcare benefits, the same retirement, contributions, and the same respect. Eleanor, who had slowly adapted to her daughter's new leadership style, smiled with genuine pride. The past months had been difficult for her, requiring a complete reassessment of values she had held for decades. But watching Charlotte transform not just the company, but herself, had been worth every uncomfortable moment of growth. The numbers don't lie, said Margaret Chen, the lead investor. Whatever changes you've made, they're working. The board is prepared to approve your expansion proposal. After the meeting ended and the boardroom emptied, Charlotte remained at the window, looking out at the New York skyline. The view was the same, but everything else had changed so dramatically that sometimes she felt like she was living someone else's life. "Proud of you," Maria said from the doorway. Charlotte turned to find the woman she was slowly learning to love all over again. They had spent the past months rebuilding their relationship from the ground up. Honest conversations over coffee instead of stolen moments in sewing rooms. Real dates instead of secret meetings. The gradual development of trust based on transparency, rather than deception. "Are you? Really?" Charlotte asked. "Even though I kept the profits from the Santos shipping merger?" Maria laughed, the sound warming the sterile corporate atmosphere. "Especially because of that. You've proven that you can be ruthless when necessary and compassionate when possible. It's an impressive combination." They had developed a ritual of meeting after Charlotte's board meetings, a way of grounding themselves in the reality of what they were building together. Some days were harder than others. Trust, once broken, required constant tending like a delicate garden. But both women had committed to the difficult work of healing. "I have news," Maria said, settling into the chair across from Charlotte's desk. "The book is finished." Charlotte felt a familiar pang of anxiety. Maria's book about class and privilege would inevitably include their story. And while she had given her permission for its inclusion, the thought of having their private struggles examined by the public still made her nervous. And I've changed my mind about publishing it." Charlotte blinked in surprise. "What? Why? You've been working on it for 2 years." Maria pulled out a thick manuscript and set it on the desk between them. "Because I realized that the most important story isn't about how the wealthy treat their employees. It's about how people can choose to change, to grow, to become better than they were raised to be." She paused, her dark eyes serious. "That's your story, Charlotte. You took a company built on exploitation and turned it into something that actually serves its community. You took a family legacy of casual cruelty and transformed it into active compassion. That's the story worth telling." Charlotte reached across the desk to touch Maria's hand, marveling at how such simple contact could still send electricity through her entire body. "What will you do instead?" "Well, I was thinking about a different kind of writing project. Something more collaborative." Maria pulled out a second document, this one embossed with the Whitmore Industries logo. A comprehensive guide to ethical business practices, co-authored by a reformed heiress and a reformed corporate spy. It could help other companies make the same transition we did. Charlotte stared at the proposal, her heart racing with excitement. You want to work together? I want to build something together. Not just a relationship, but a legacy. Something that proves love can be a force for change instead of just a pretty sentiment. Before Charlotte could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Dinner tonight at 7. I'm making Maria's favorite pasta dish. Don't be late." Charlotte showed Maria the message, and they both laughed at the absurdity of how completely their lives had transformed. Eleanor Whitmore, who had once threatened to destroy Maria's livelihood, now cooked special meals to welcome her into the family. "So," Maria said, standing and moving around the desk to where Charlotte sat. "Partners in business and in life?" Charlotte stood as well, closing the distance between them until they were breathing the same air, partners in everything. When they kissed, it was with the passion of new love and the depth of hard-won understanding. They had both paid the price for their deceptions and misconceptions, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and completely committed to building something real together. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Charlotte reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had lost a fortune built on lies and gained a partnership built on truth. She had given up the security of a predetermined future and embraced the terrifying freedom of unlimited possibility. The golden cage was gone forever, replaced by something far more valuable, a life of her own choosing, shared with someone who saw her not as an heiress or an asset, but simply as Charlotte. And for the first time in her 25 years, that was more than enough.